BlogTalk Radio.
Welcome to the AME Food Testing Show. Today's topic, Intelleflex, Extended Capability RFID Tags for Food Cold Chain Assurance, with Kevin Payne, Senior Director of Marketing, Intelleflex Corporation. Kevin Payne is Senior Director of Marketing at Intelleflex, where he leads corporate communications, partner marketing, and demand generation programs. He has led marketing teams at both startup and mid-sized high-tech firms, most recently at i365, a wholly owned subsidiary of Seagate Technology. He previously managed corporate and program marketing for Portal Software, SAS Institute, and NEC Systems. Please welcome with me to our program, the AME Food Testing Show, our guest, Kevin Payne. Kevin?
Hello, thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Nice to be with you. Thank you very much.
Would you like to update us on your current activities?
Sure.
Intelleflex. I'll get it right. Intelleflex.
Intelleflex, yes. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to. Intelleflex is a startup company. We've been around for about 9 years. We specialize in cold chain solutions for the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, as well as some other markets and asset tracking and things like that. Currently, we're really focused on helping to deploy solutions to improve food quality and food safety for growers of fresh fruits, produce, vegetables, meat, seafood, and poultry, and other perishable items such as that, as well as frozen and processed foods.
Fascinating. That's exactly on target with our listening audience of about 19,000 listeners, primarily interested in food production, food quality, food safety, and food security. Let's begin. What is an RFID tag?
An RFID tag is a wireless tag that uses radio signals to communicate. So there are different types of RFID, and without going into too much technology on it, ours is what's called a passive RFID. You can place a tag into a container, such as a pallet or a bin or a tote, and collect information about both the location and the condition of the contents of that container wirelessly and without changing your cold chain or supply chain operations. Effectively, you have a reader, which is a device that basically broadcasts a radio signal. It transmits to the tag. The tag has, in our case, a temperature sensor on it. The temperature sensor collects temperature data at a given interval. You can take and collect information every 1 minute or as seldom as every 5 days. We find in most cold chain applications, typically every 15 minutes, the tag basically wakes up, notes the temperature, and stores that information on the tag. When the tag is contacted by a reader, it gets that information back to the reader, and the reader can then transmit that information into other applications such as warehouse management systems, supply chain systems, or to web-based applications. With that information about the condition as well as the location, you can help to accomplish several things. You can primarily, one thing that's a huge benefit is reduce the amount of waste or shrink that takes place in the supply chain. You can do that by knowing the condition of the product from the time it's harvested or manufactured, all the way through to the retailer or food service provider, for example. And with that information, you can do things like prioritize routing. You can take product that has aged more, ship it to a closer location for quicker consumption, or a product that's essentially fresher, has more remaining shelf life, and either store that longer or ship it to a more distant location. The net effect is that when the food's received by the retailer or the food service provider, they know it has adequate freshness to sell, so they're able to get more product out the door, more product sold, more revenue to the grower or the producer, is one benefit. Second benefit relates to food safety. From the time you harvest or manufacture a product all the way through the cold chain, it can be exposed to a variety of different conditions. And if the product is exposed to high temperatures for any amount of time, it can lead to conditions where you're going to have more food safety risks. Essentially, if product's stored at a higher temperature, you're going to get the likelihood of more growth of things like E. coli, salmonella, or listeria. So by using temperature monitors and using wireless temperature monitors such as what we provide, you can more simply improve and monitor the quality, freshness, and potentially the safety of the food that you're shipping.
Excellent introduction. So an RFID tag is radio frequency identification. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so this tag sits on the vendor's product's casing. It's not inside the food. It's on the outside.
No, actually, this is a key differentiator for us. The way our technology works, it has the capability of actually putting the tag in with the product. So you get the actual true product condition. A lot of times what other solutions offer is only the capability you just described, which is the ability to read the temperature or the condition outside, the ambient temperature, outside the box, outside the carton, outside the pallet. And that's not accurate or reflective of the actual condition of what's going on inside the product itself. So by putting the tag in with the product, you get a much more accurate representation of the true condition of the product and what's happened to it throughout the cold chain as it moves from harvest or manufacturer all the way through to the retailer or food service provider.
That's an excellent positioning of your technology. How specifically would an RFID tag help food producers now that it's inside the package?
Well, specifically, so for example, we've done, as well as universities have done, a number of tests and field trials, and I'm going to use a produce example. There's a tremendous amount of impact on the quality, freshness, and potentially the safety of product from the moment it's harvested in the field. As soon as you pick a blackberry or harvest a cucumber or tomato, whatever, it starts to age, and it starts to experience temperature variations. So, for example, in one case study we did, we had working with a grower in Mexico, blackberry producer, and you can imagine this is in central Mexico in the summertime. It makes a huge difference if you're harvesting first thing in the morning, maybe it's 70 degrees, versus middle of the afternoon where maybe it's 95 degrees. It makes a huge difference if the product sits in the field for an hour versus if it sits in the field for 4 hours. So you can see each product, each pallet is going to have its own unique temperature history, its own unique condition experience. And most growers, we found, don't factor that in. So as the stuff moves from the field to the packing house, you're already receiving product that may have aged a couple of days in practical experience, whereas you just look at it and say, okay, it's 4 hours old or an hour old. In fact, that product may have already aged as many as 3 or 4 days by the time it's even received at the packing house 4 hours later. Without temperature monitoring, you don't know that. You cannot tell from looking at a product what it's experienced. One of the problems with the impact of temperature on produce in particular is that the spoilage, the waste, doesn't occur until the very end. You can't see it. And most of the growers today are using just visual inspection, which is inadequate. By monitoring the temperature at the pallet level from the time the product's harvested, as it comes in from the field to the packing house, you can do a much better job of managing quality. And as I touched upon earlier, you can do things like prioritize routing or building uniform pallets where every crate on that pallet has the same relative remaining shelf life. And by doing that, you reduce waste. You also can then monitor for conditions that could lead to food safety issues. So another benefit is the product moves through the supply chain. Now imagine if you're a retailer or a restaurant, and you're receiving product from probably hundreds of different providers, different growers, different manufacturers. You're receiving that product and you're basing your acceptance or rejection of that product purely on visual inspection. You don't know the condition it's been in. You don't know if it has 2 days of shelf life left. You don't know if it has 8 days of shelf life left. You don't know if it sat on an airport tarmac at 100 degrees for 8 hours or on a ship dock for 4 hours at 90 degrees. You also don't know if it was refrigerated properly while it was in the back of a truck from the distribution center to a retailer or to a restaurant. So you're essentially kind of flying blind. You're trusting based on your visual inspection that the product's been handled properly. And this presents a lot of risks and a lot of challenges. So what we provide is the ability to minimize those risks and to make a more intelligent, adaptable supply chain. We found that you can never eliminate all the variables. You cannot, prevent a truck from breaking down. You cannot prevent a refrigeration unit from malfunctioning. But by monitoring the temperature at the pallet level, you can make more educated decisions that allow you to improve your supply chain management using actionable data about the condition of the product. One thing that's been very visible in the news this year has been the issue, for example, of truckers who, for whatever reason, the refrigeration system isn't functioning in the truck. And the product may be fine when it goes into the truck, but it may heat up to 70, 80, 90, 100 degrees in the back of a truck. There was an incident in the Midwest where the state troopers were randomly pulling over refrigerated tractor trailers and opening the back of the trailer to check what the temperature was. And they found, in one case, it was over 100 degrees in the back of the trailer, and chicken was thawing, and chicken juice was melting and dripping onto cabbage. And this was all going to be delivered to a restaurant. And if you're that restaurant owner and you don't know that, you're potentially accepting product that could be very well contaminated. By temperature monitoring, you can get an instant record when you receive the product that it's been handled properly throughout the cold chain.
Kevin, that's an amazing perspective for food producers. You're taking them from, as you said, an eyeball qualitative judgment that's really ignorant of the entire cold chain history to a quantitative, historical, documented, and the beautiful thing about computers is that they give a time and a date stamp that's irrevocable. You can't erase it. You can't write over it. Once it's on there digitally, it's there forever. Is that an accurate representation?
That's an exact, perfect analysis of what we do and what we provide. And it's interesting because it's kind of a double-edged sword. I don't mean to harp on truckers and distribution companies because for every one of them that may turn off a refrigerator, there's probably a dozen that are doing their best to make sure they maintain, the ideal shipping conditions and good quality and good food safety. One of the weird things that happens is they may be doing their job perfectly and the product may be handled absolutely perfectly throughout shipment, but they get blamed when there are quality issues or safety issues. And one of the things that we enable them to do is document that when they received the product, it was in this condition, that they handled it properly throughout, and when they delivered it, it was in this condition. So we can, by establishing waypoints when a trucker, for example, receives a product, to the point where they hand it off to a distributor or a retailer or a food service provider, they can document and show records that they've handled it properly throughout and that they're doing their job correctly. So it as you say, it provides physical evidence of quality handling and potentially avoiding food safety issues. Imagine, though, if you're, and as a consumer, you go into a restaurant, let's say it's a fast food restaurant, and you order a hamburger, you're expecting that the meat's fresh and the produce is fresh and everything. So just imagine all the things that are on a typical hamburger you might get at a restaurant, between the bread, the meat, the cheese, the lettuce, the tomato, the pickles, you name it. Those components, those ingredients are coming from hundreds of growers, dozens of manufacturers, through dozens of distribution centers, and a restaurant manager in that case has got to trust and accept that stuff's all being handled properly. And that's a huge risk. It's a huge risk for a brand owner if you're a major restaurant. If somebody goes into one of your restaurants in, let's say, New York and gets sick, then that's impacting your ability, your brand across the country, if not across the world. That could impact your revenues. And we're seeing both restaurants, large restaurant chains, as well as large retail grocery chains, realizing that their brand is at risk and wanting to find ways to protect themselves and protect their customers by better managing their cold chains.
Kevin, that is an excellent summary of verifying the veracity of production and trucking. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because in my previous interviews, I've had major trucking firms who are proactively monitoring temperature and proactively monitoring the quality performance of their employees during that cold chain. And we imagine and we differentiate those people that I've interviewed with many that obviously are not. Gas being almost $5 a gallon, fuel being incredible. Another aspect that you brought out in your discussion was the responsibility along the entire food chain, how the end retailer may be eventually responsible and is ultimately responsible in their brand. I've also had on the program a lawyer who has made over $600 million in the last few years suing food companies. And he not only sues the food company that delivered the food or produced it, but everyone along that chain of production. So let me ask you, what other information could the RFID tag track besides temperature?
Well, so you can put a sensor, various types of sensors on RFID tags. The other common ones that people talk about are beyond temperature, humidity, vibration, shock, and light are the most commonly mentioned ones. And each of them have various degrees of importance for food versus things like pharmaceuticals, for example. One other one, humidity is a fairly common request because that can impact food safety and food quality. And then vibration is one we actually come across fairly frequently in food because it impacts the quality. If you're bouncing stuff along a bumpy road and it starts rubbing against each other, it breaks the quality of the food down and can cause it to rot faster. But I want to go back to something you mentioned a moment ago as far as trucking companies monitoring the quality. One of the things that's generally done, if they're monitoring temperature at all, they typically monitor it at trailer level. So they'll put a temperature monitor, maybe two, in the back of a tractor trailer. And you've got maybe 26 pallets of product in that trailer. And what we've found is that the trailer temperature is not an accurate representation of the actual condition of the product in that trailer. In other words, the temperature varies significantly from pallet to pallet within the trailer. And as a result, each pallet is going to have its own unique temperature history, which could relate to both quality and food safety. And this is why we advocate for pallet level monitoring. And the reason for that is going back to, in the case of produce, when you're pulling product from the field, as I mentioned, it's experiencing its own unique history. One pallet may have sat out in the field for 4 hours. Another may be only an hour. It could be harvested in the morning or the afternoon. When it comes into the packing house, they do something called pre-cooling. So they'll try and get the temperature down to a uniform level before they load it in the trucks and ship it off to the distribution centers and the retailers. But the problem is that pre-cool process is not consistent most of the time, and that many pallets will go into the back of the trailer hot. And what they'll do is the fruit ripens, it actually heats up. And you'll have one hot pallet that's now heating the pallets around it. And in studies we've done, the pallets can age as much as twice what you would expect. So in the case of this blackberry study I mentioned earlier with this grower in Mexico, they were shipping stuff from central Mexico into the United States, and it was roughly a 5-day trip aboard truck. And over the course of that 5-day trip, about 70% of the pallets, 26 pallets in this case, 70% of those aged approximately 5 days over a 5-day trip, which is what you would expect. But 30% of them aged significantly faster. One pallet, in fact, aged 10 days over the 5-day trip. And this is because it was not properly chilled when it went into the back of the trailer. And as a result, when that trailer is received by the retailer or the distribution center, they'll typically, again, do either pick a pallet and sample it, or they'll do a visual inspection. And the net impact is, if you're just doing one random sample of a pallet, and let's say you pick that one pallet that's good, and it's aged 5 days, in this case, over the 5-day trip, you accept the entire shipment. So you're accepting 70% good pallets, but you're going to sell 30% bad pallets. So you're now putting 30% product on the shelf that's going to spoil or rot, or potentially even have food safety issues, onto the store shelves and sell that to your customers. Conversely, if you happen to sample a bad pallet, one of those 30% of the pallets, and you say, okay, this stuff is bad, it's not sellable, I'm rejecting the entire shipment, you've now rejected 30% you shouldn't have sold, but you've also rejected 70% of the pallets that could have been sold perfectly fine, perfectly fresh, and perfectly safe for consumers to buy. So you're throwing a lot of money away because you just don't have that empirical evidence, the objective data that you mentioned earlier when you're handling stuff as it moves through the cold chain.
I keep hearing, Kevin, you refer back to an evidence-based argument about product and its marketability. That is very impressive. It is a quantitative, data-driven decision-making model. And I'm finding that those companies that use that sort of very technical matrix of decision-making are more successful in the long run. They save money. They're more efficient, rather than the old-school eyeball method. Do you find that, as a marketing director, that your clients are the more successful companies and the others that do not use similar or your type of technology are falling behind the curve?
Well, at this point, we're early in the adoption curve. I would say that over the course of the next year or two, you're going to see the brand, I'll call them brand visionary companies, the companies that realize that this creates a competitive advantage, that it's a differentiator in terms of quality, food safety, freshness, are going to be implementing this. There's another angle that comes in on this that influences this as well, which is the Food Safety Modernization Act and the Produce Traceability Initiative. And as the Food Safety Modernization Act, which was passed in early 2011, goes into effect, it's mandating people to come up with ways of documenting food as it moves through the supply chain, that you have complete traceability records, electronic traceability records. And this is another advantage we provide, is because that data is all stored on these RFID tags, as well as available in the cloud, for example, so you can easily access it and share it from anywhere. We provide that electronic traceability record from field to fork is the conceptual way of saying it. And enable you to improve the ability to identify at-risk food that has to be recalled, where it came from, and hopefully shorten that recall cycle from what's now weeks or months to hours or days. What's interesting about that is initially, if you talk to most people, their automatic response is, oh, great, here's another regulation, this is going to cost me money. And it's another expense in an industry that's got razor-thin margins. And in fact, what we're able to show them is that when you do traceability along with temperature monitoring at the same time, the ability to reduce the waste and reduce the shrink means that you're selling more products, you're generating more revenue, and at the same time getting the traceability data. So in fact, you're making more money and getting the traceability for free because you're better managing your product through the cold chain. So we provide the ability for people to more easily and cost-effectively address Food Safety Modernization Act requirements. And then this is also ties into another change that the industry is dealing with, which is the rapid and increasing globalization of the cold chain. We get in the United States, I think 70% of our seafood is now imported. Depending on which statistic you look at, it's anywhere from 25 to 65% of our produce comes in from outside the U.S. That raises additional food safety and traceability questions, but it also just elongates the cold chain. It means things are taking longer as strawberries and lettuce and such comes from South America into the United States during the winter. Or in Europe, they get it, from South Africa. It comes into the UK or France, what have you. Those are, multiple day supply chains, very different than shipping stuff from the Central Valley of California to Los Angeles or Phoenix or something like that, where it's, a few hours or a day. You're now looking at stuff coming in on boats, stuff coming in on aircraft, and things like seafood, highly, highly temperature sensitive, that you want to know that over the course of that several days journey that it's been handled properly. So yet another wrinkle that the food industry is dealing with as the supply chain becomes increasingly more global and more complicated.
Well, Kevin, you've given us an excellent perspective from the food producing side. Let's switch our table and let's get on the consumer side. What are the benefits for the consumer?
Ultimately, it's better quality product. As a consumer, you'll know that you're buying product that's fresh, that many of us have had that experience when you've gone into a grocery store and you buy a basket of strawberries and they look perfectly fine. You take them home, put them in the fridge, you get up the next morning to have them for breakfast and they've got all that nice white fuzzy stuff on them. That's an indication that the product has aged too much. It wasn't handled properly in transit, wasn't stored properly, wasn't refrigerated properly, and you throw that food out. Furthermore, you suspect the quality of your retailer, and you may change grocery stores, for example. By improved temperature monitoring, you have an assurance that your product that you buy, those strawberries, when you take them home, they're going to be fresh for 4 or 5 days, and you're going to get your money's worth out of them. You will have a better sense that there's less chance of food safety issues. Over time, as this plays out, and the technology actually exists for this, although it hasn't become cost-effective and all the linkages haven't been put together yet, but ultimately you'll be able to go in with your smartphone and scan a QR code or a barcode and ascertain the entire history of that product that you're about to buy. And get the complete temperature history. You can get the information on who grew the product, where it came from, when it was harvested, and how it was handled throughout. That's a few years away, but you'll have, as a consumer, at some point you'll have the ability to document the entire history and quality of the products you buy at the store. And it's not just fresh food. It's and I mentioned not fresh food, but produce. It's seafood. It's poultry. It's meat. It's also frozen food because frozen food is something that you don't want it to thaw in transit and then get refrozen. Yet that can happen, just as we talked about the issues with refrigeration for produce in the backs of trucks. That thawing and refreezing not only affects the safety potentially, but it certainly affects the quality. So we're seeing increasing awareness in things around frozen foods as well. But ultimately, it comes back to, as a consumer, you're going to have better quality product. It's going to be fresh longer, and you will have, because if it's handled properly and documented that it's handled properly, you'll have less chance of food safety issues. I do want to clarify, though, one thing that RFID does not track and does not test for is the presence of bacteria such as Listeria, E. coli, or Salmonella. What we do is identify conditions where you can propagate the growth of those bacteria.
Excellent. Kevin, your discussion on the consumer side has been most enlightening, and you've given us a perspective of the potential of the future for consumers to look at an identifier, whether it's a 3D tag, you've seen those little square ones, or a barcode we're more familiar with, and people that have smartphones. What you're talking about is a very high-level analysis on the consumer side. So the question for me is, what about people that buy from companies that aren't going to be using these new technologies? What's at risk for them? Ones that can't afford to go to the highbrow shopping areas.
Well, over time, I think, again, going back to the point that this actually is cost-effective, the supply chain actually can do this and make more money than they're making today. As this gets implemented over time, that shouldn't be an issue. Everybody should be able to provide that quality product because everybody should be able to implement it cost effectively. So regardless of what store you buy at, they should be able to implement this cost effectively. There are other approaches to this. There are people that talk about dynamic pricing is another thing that consumers may start to see, where you have a choice of buying, let's say, 2 baskets of strawberries, one that's got a day of shelf life left and one that's got 6 days of shelf life left, or relative shelf life. And a consumer can then have a choice to say, I'm going to eat these this afternoon, and this basket of strawberries that needs to be consumed by tomorrow is, $1, and this other one is $4. And the consumer can then make a decision based on that using dynamic pricing. And that has potential benefits for consumers. It has potential benefits for retailers. That's still a little ways away, but it's certainly very doable. But ultimately, I think, and I think the Food Safety Modernization Act drives towards this as well, is that everybody should be able to afford fresh quality food that's been handled properly. And you can actually do it cost effectively, which makes it possible to implement a solution that accomplishes that. So I hope it does not get to the point where it's a have and have not, where some people can shop at a very high-end gourmet grocery store and know they're getting good product, but people that can't afford that are at risk. I hope we don't get to that. It doesn't have to come to that. Everybody should be able to benefit from this.
Excellent. Well, let me summarize your offering as an electronic device that attaches to food products to assure that food quality, food safety, and food security. What other products and services does Intelleflex offer at this time?
Well, we offer a variety of different tags and different types of RFID readers. The other thing that we've really been working on of late is a way of making the data more available. So one of the challenges with RFID technologies is it's great at capturing data, but it doesn't really in and of itself do a great job of sharing the data and making it readily available. We tend to talk about information silos. So where the reader is, you collect the data, but then what do you do with it? So earlier this year, we introduced a cloud-based data service, and the idea behind that is not only do we now capture the data on demand as product moves through the cold chain, but using a cloud-based data service, you can now make that data available anywhere that you can use a web browser, on your smartphone, on your iPad, on your desktop. And that enables the cold chain to better manage their processes and understand the condition of their products dynamically as it moves through the cold chain. So imagine, for example, if, I'm going back to this Mexico grower I talked about, imagine if you're capturing that temperature data as the product comes in from the field. You're not only capturing the temperature data, but also quantity of product being harvested, where it's being harvested, when it's being harvested. And that information is now made available to a retailer through the web, through the cloud, and that retailer's, let's say, in Chicago. And they can look and say, oh, today we harvested twice as many blackberries as we usually do. And the quality is exceptional. So I know ahead of time I'm going to want to offer price incentives to my customers because I have higher quality, higher quantity at any one time. Point being, that information is now no longer limited to just where it's collected. It can be made available seamlessly through the cloud to your customers, to your trading partners. It even can be made available to your financial or insurance providers. One thing we haven't talked about is the whole angle of ensuring the quality of product. And, for example, we formed a strategic alliance with the Hartford Financial Services Group last year, and their angle on this is they want to ultimately reduce loss. They want to reduce risk. They want to reduce waste. And the benefit they offer to their customers is by monitoring temperature, monitoring condition, and having the actionable data to proactively manage your supply chain, you can help reduce waste and reduce risk. And that can be financially beneficial to the customer. And you may want to share this type of information with your insurance provider, for example, because they may ultimately give you lower rates because you're documenting the quality of your product as it goes through the supply chain, and you're reducing the risk, which is ultimately what you're insuring against.
Well, I'll have to say this, Kevin. You have hit a lot of hot buttons for food production, food quality, food safety, and food security managers with your technologies. I'll have to also confess and disclose that our company does a lot of food safety audits for the Hartford, and those companies that get X score actually get a reduction in their rates as well as a discount if they engage in certain other food safety practices. So I think we're in alignment there. Well, Kevin, I'd like to allow you now a summary of our discussion prior to the close of this interview. Would you please like to review for us what is an RFID tag, how does the RFID tag help food producers, and what other information can be tracked, what are the benefits for consumers, and a summary of the new web-based data dispersion technologies that you've developed.
Sure, thank you. RFID essentially is a wireless way of collecting data, and the beauty of the wireless technology is that it means you don't really have to adjust your cold chain or supply chain processes. You don't have to visually look at and find a barcode. So it simplifies the ability to collect information about what your product is, where it is, and the condition of your product. We also add the ability to put sensors such as temperature on the tag and collect that data throughout. This provides the ability to monitor on demand the condition of the product as it moves through the cold chain. And with this information, you can help to reduce shrink and waste of product by prioritized routing, building uniform pallets, and eliminating the requirement for visual inspection by having a quantifiable data set that tells you exactly what the pallets of product have experienced as they've moved through the supply chain. The net effect is by reducing waste, by reducing shrink, you make more product available to the retailer to sell. That generates more revenue. And at the same time, we provide a traceability record directly with the product that can create a complete history from harvest or manufacture all the way to retail or food service provider. The cloud-based solution, which we call Zest Data Services, enables you to collect and share that information more easily across the cold chain, through the supply chain, through your trading partners, through your customers, and make more informed decisions and improve the quality of the product. And in terms of food safety, knowing the condition and the history of the product as it moves through the cold chain, you can help to identify areas where product may have been at risk. You can then identify and test those products to make sure they're still safe for consumption, or if they're not, you can pull them and destroy them. The net effect, we think, is it's a cost-effective solution for growers and manufacturers. You effectively generate more in revenue while also addressing the traceability requirements at the same time, essentially kind of getting traceability for free. So we think it's a net-net win for growers, for manufacturers, and for consumers alike.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much for your very informative interview today. You have really enlightened our audience of food production, food quality, food safety, and food security managers, and I'd like to allow you your closing comments.
No, I just thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and your audience today. It's been a pleasure, and we look forward to continuing to make things better in the cold chain.
Thank you so much again. If you come up with some new technologies, feel free to contact the program for another interview. You've been a most informative guest.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day. Bye now.
Bye-bye.